All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Teresa Woodard in the WFAA newsroom on a historic day in our nation and definitely in the state of Texas. Joined by Jason Whiteley here. The Supreme Court has overturned Roe versus Wade, that landmark decision that gave women a right to an abortion that no longer stands in the United States.
So for the first time in almost 50 years, abortion will be illegal in the state of Texas. The Supreme Court justices in a 6-3 decision essentially said that it's up to the states now to decide what to do about abortion. A number of southern states, Texas included, have decided to outlaw abortion here. This is a huge day for Christian conservatives who have been trying to get this done for the past 40+ years or so. On the other side, you have a lot of women's rights folks, a lot of women who are upset about this decision. Obviously, it is one of the most contentious items in our country and has been for a half century.
Absolutely. So we're going to break down exactly what this opinion says and what it will mean for women, specifically here in the state of Texas. Remember that during the last legislative session, Texas passed what's called a trigger law, which means that within 30 days of this opinion being issued, all abortions in the state of Texas will be outlawed, except for in that case of saving the pregnant person's life. And there's some confusion over exactly what that means. Would doctors be willing to perform that service, because it's not exactly spelled out what it means to save a pregnant person's life. I do want to read quickly. We did get a statement from Governor Abbott within the last few minutes or so. He says, quote, "The U.S. Supreme Court correctly overturned Roe v. Wade and reinstated the right of states to protect innocent unborn children." He goes on to say, "Texas has prioritized supporting women's health care and expectant mothers in need to give them the necessary resources so that they can choose life for their child." He says, "I signed laws that extended Medicaid health care coverage to 6 months postpartum, appropriated $345 million for women's health programs, invested more than $100 million toward our Alternatives to Abortion program." Basically, he is saying that while many on the side that say we don't do enough to serve mothers, if we're going to tell them they have to have these children, we don't do enough to serve them and give them enough once the baby is born. He's ticking off reasons and trying to say, hey, here's evidence that I have done things to support women once the baby is delivered.
And on the other side of the equation also, we just had a statement from the Texas Democratic Party. This is the co-executive director, Hannah Robeck. She just sent out a statement saying nearly 50 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court enshrined Roe v. Wade, the fundamental right to reproductive freedom for all Americans. Today, she wrote, our worst fear was realized. The court has overturned that ruling, ending the federal constitutional protection of abortion rights and threatening the reproductive liberty for millions of Americans. So we're starting to get a lot of feedback from different folks who obviously have.
I think our inboxes are both.
They're both blowing up
right.
with statements from everyone. We have a number of guests we're going to get to in just a moment here too. But just in case you missed the news, about 9:10 this morning, about 25 minutes ago, the U.S. Supreme Court in a 6-3 decision voted with a super conservative majority, voted to overturn Roe versus Wade. So the Dobbs decision, this case that was based in Mississippi, is the new precedent, this new landmark decision, a historic day for this country and for abortion rights and for women's rights.
I'm taken back to being at the Supreme Court in November when our Texas case, SB 8, was being argued in front of the Supreme Court, and standing in front of the court steps that morning, and just the emotion, the deep emotion that is always on display for this issue. But that morning in particular, you just saw how this is an issue that affects every person in the United States, because everybody has an opinion about how they feel. And so this morning we are seeing on the steps of the Supreme Court that emotion spill out. We're seeing rallies already. We're seeing protests already. And it is a landmark day in the history of the United States, and again, particularly here in Texas, because of that trigger law. It does mean that 30 days from today, barring any sort of legal wrangling that might be able to happen between now and 30 days, that complete ban, total ban on abortions would go into effect here in the state of Texas.
In this state too, just for clarity, the Supreme Court is allowing states to decide this. So in Texas and southern states, you will likely see the conservative Democratic-led states, you will likely see abortion outlawed in many other states across the country. California has already said it is going to make abortion legal there. So instead of this being a constitutional right enshrined by the U.S. Constitution in the 1973 decision, the justices today said it's up to the states to decide this. I do want to pause just for a second here for a quick little housekeeping thing internally. Pete, when we get our guests on the line here, my IFB is not working, so I need to figure out how I can hear these folks in just a minute. If you can get engineering in here to figure that out for us too. And we're watching coverage too. Pete, if we can take any of the live feeds from Washington, D.C. outside the U.S. about, that was looking from the U.S. Capitol over towards the U.S. Supreme Court. This was a 213-page decision that came out. So right now, legal minds are going through this, parsing through it, making sure they understand exactly what it means. But one of the guys that we count on a lot for our Y'all-itics political podcast and for Inside Texas Politics says that the decision that came out today looks a lot like Justice Alito's leaked draft that came out a few months ago as well too.
I've heard some people who've said there's very little difference.
Yeah.
I have not, and I know it takes a while to read that long of an opinion, but the coverage that I'm seeing says that there really is no surprise, that basically the leak that we saw back then is very similar to the opinion that we are getting today. And going back, you mentioned other states. I did want to mention, we've talked a little bit about Texas's trigger law. There are other states who have passed something very similar. That's Arkansas, Idaho, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, Utah, Wyoming. So those are the states that have passed laws similar to what Texas has in place. The trigger law, that means 30 days from now, abortions will be banned in those states. And that trigger law also, there's criminal penalties associated with it. So any doctor that would perform an abortion faces life in prison and a fine of $100,000 if they violate that law. Right now, there is an exemption where the woman who has the procedure would not be fined.
Not under Texas law. This Texas law here too. But we can't overstate how obviously divisive this is. But for Christians who have prayed for this day for the past 40 plus years, when this really became an issue in the evangelical church in the early 1980s, this is a huge day. This is a prayer answered for them type of day that many didn't think would ever come. On the opposite side, you have the same thing. You have so many people supporting women's rights who never expected this day would come. After a half century, this getting overturned. Do we have any of our folks in yet, Pete?
Working on it.
Okay.
Oops, sorry.
We're trying to get a few technical things worked out here. It's what happens on
You
these
also
live
have-
digital feeds.
Yeah, we also have people who are concerned about what this means for other things that have, for other rights that the Supreme Court has ruled on. So you have people questioning whether gay marriage might be in danger, things like that. So those are questions that the legal minds will have to sort through once they read the details of this opinion and let us know what they think this could potentially mean for future decisions.
And if there's one thing that Republicans really wanted from President Trump, that was replacing the Supreme Court justices, as many as possible, with conservative justices. And President Trump placed three justices on there, and that's all it took. So when this thing was challenged, when Mississippi challenged Roe versus Wade, it had been challenged multiple times over the years. Texas was challenging it as well too. But the Mississippi case is what put it over the top.
This certainly feels like this would be sort of the legacy of Trump and Mitch McConnell by being able to get those three justices on the Supreme Court. This is, like you said, this is exactly what they wanted. And the justices who were in the majority opinion here are Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, he authored the opinion, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. And those three last ones I just mentioned are the three that came from the Trump administration.
Yeah, indeed so. We also got a statement from Whole Woman's Health, which is the abortion clinic, essentially, that has been behind some of the legal action here in the state of Texas. Whole Woman's Health, which is based out of Virginia, the president and CEO said the U.S. Supreme Court has turned its back on millions of people and families across the U.S. who need abortion care. We will never do that, she wrote. We are here. She said, we are not going away, period, ever, period. She said that her organization, Whole Woman's Health, will continue its long and proud tradition of providing high-quality, compassionate, personal abortion care in the remaining states where pregnant people's needs and rights are still respected and protected under the law. So that's going to be the decision now, up to state legislatures to decide, if they haven't already, where things stand now and what happens next. You can bet when the Texas legislature reconvenes in January, the Republican majority there will likely look at tightening restrictions even further. We have heard from some lawmakers already who say that they want to punish companies who will pay for their employees to go out of state to get abortions. So there's going to be a tightening in states like Texas, southern states, Republican-controlled states. On the opposite side, on the Democratic-controlled states like California, like New York, and others, you will probably have a loosening there too. And we've already seen in Florida, the New York Times did a great story the other day talking about abortion clinics in Tampa that are open right now are seeing a huge influx for women from Texas who are flying there. Let's go back to that picture, Pete, right outside the U.S. Supreme Court. There are people gathering there. This was an opinion day where the U.S. Supreme Court is issuing some 40-plus opinions over the last few weeks. There were 9 left as of 9 a.m. this morning Central Time, and a few people had already gathered outside the U.S. Supreme Court. And we can see from that live picture, Pete, if we can take it back, that people are still out there. And you can bet, Teresa, you've been out there, I've been out there. That crowd is only going to grow. You can bet we'll have protests on both sides.
Absolutely. And I remember, as I said, being there in early November when the Texas case was being argued, SB 8, and just how loud and passionate both sides were. And without a doubt, the crowd that you see there will remain. It will only grow over the next few hours. And I'm certainly not going to be surprised if we start to see some spontaneous demonstrations pop up in cities all across the United States. I do want to, earlier I read a statement that came from Texas Governor Greg Abbott. His opponent, Beto O'Rourke, has also released a statement, and I want to read that as well. And he says, quote, "The only way to overcome the decision is to win this race for governor. The Supreme Court has sent this back to the states, and our state's current governor has outlawed abortion beginning at conception with no exception for incest." He says, if you care about protecting a woman's freedom to make decisions about her own body, health care, and future, join this campaign as win. So this is the division in the state. This is the division across the country. We will hear Republicans celebrating this decision and Democrats condemning.
Indeed so. We just got a statement from the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, too, and I want to read something that really stood out to me here, too. He says that obviously congratulates the U.S. Supreme Court, the 6-3 decision that came down today. He also wrote in his third line in his statement orders, he announced that the statewide closure of agencies' offices all across Texas today in honor of what he saw the nearly 70 million unborn babies killed in the womb since 1973. The Attorney General, Ken Paxton, goes on to say that June 24th, today, moving forward, will be an annual Office of the Attorney General holiday in recognition of this decision today and the many lives lost before it. Republicans clearly already reacting to it. They were expecting this to happen. We were expecting this to happen, especially after the Alito draft came out today. So this is not huge breaking news in that sense, because people were prepared for this to come down today.
And many people had their statements ready to go. They had people lined up and ready to talk with us. In fact, we now have with us on the line, I believe, the senior legislative associate for Texas Right to Life. Her name is Rebecca Parma. There's Rebecca. Rebecca, I'm going to ask you, can you just say hello real quickly? Let's see if Jason can hear. Can you hear
hi. Thanks for having me.
I cannot.
I cannot hear you. Hold on for it's probably a technical. I do not hear her either, Pete. No, not at this moment.
Rebecca,
Sorry, Rebecca.
yeah, if you can stand by just a second, we'll want to hear what you have to say about this decision that came down about almost 40 minutes ago here, too. We're seeing that, Teresa, statement after statement, reaction after reaction from organizations across the state. ABC has just also put together a map, essentially, of the states ban abortion now that they have been given that right by the U.S. Supreme Court. States that will allow it too. We've mentioned some know of that will already be banning it and some that will be allowing it. But none of these really are surprises here. The ones that have Republican-controlled legislatures or governors are the ones that will be banning it. On the opposite side there, Teresa, any of them that have Democratic-controlled legislators will be allowed. Let me get this call real quick from one of a state lawmaker.
Yes,
here.
I've had.
Yes, sir.
Just a reminder. This is
No,
live digital coverage.
Let's
so
do
you have
this.
one of the on
Let
the
me put
phone
you on.
and one of us.
Let me put you on speaker real quick. Is that okay? All right. All right. Hold on. I'm gonna put you on speaker here. We're doing live digital coverage here too.
Everybody.
We have on the line here on my cell phone here, State Senator Brian Hughes. He is a Republican state senator. He represents Mineola, parts of East Texas as well. Of course, is the author of the Heartbeat Bill, which passed last legislative session. It is SB 8. It is one that was before the court too. Senator, you're on speaker here. You're on our coverage. Thanks for being here. You can hear us okay?
I can hear you fine. Thank you for having me.
We saw your statement come out here too. I just wanted to ask you, words say one thing, but speaking with someone says something else too. Through where you were at the time that this came down, were you watching the SCOTUS like the rest of us were here in the WFAA newsroom, or did you get a call about this?
Sir, we were watching for it. New opinions were coming out today and knew this he won. So like you and so many Americans in the world, I'm sure we're watching for this. So it's a big day. Mentioned in the statement, this really is the end of a chapter in our history. Dr. King's dream was that someday America would rise up and live out the true meaning of creed, that all men are created equal. And we take a big step closer to that today, when those most innocent little unborn baby growing inside her mother's womb, when her life is now going to be protected, going to get the protection of the laws. Of course, there's work. As you know, in Texas, we've taken real steps and put real money by helping those mothers, giving them tangible help, encouragement, loving them. We're going to be doing more of that. So there's a lot of work to do.
I know my colleague here, Teresa Woodard, she's sitting with me on the desk here. I know she probably has questions too. I have others, but stand by. I'm going to pass the phone right over to her.
Okay, thank you.
Senator, you just talked doing more to put money in place where mothers will need it. What do you say to a woman who made this decision today and feels like their freedom has been taken away from freedom to build a life of their own? That's something that was an argument for a while, that this was Roe v. Wade allowed a woman to choose her future. What do you say to women who believe that their freedoms have been away?
That's right. There's nothing more personal, nothing difficult that America deals with today in public policy than this issue. Question of where life begins. If we're talking about the life of the mother, of course, we got to think about her life, her rights. Also think about the rights of the little unborn baby growing inside of her. So we believe that we can save the life of the unborn baby while we love and support the mother. That's really what this is about. We recognize that for almost 50 years, this has been the law under that flawed Supreme Court argument. Many Americans have grown up thinking this is normal, but as the Supreme Court, the right to abortion, the right to take the life of a little unborn baby in the Constitution, it never has been. So this is not the end of the discussion. This is the beginning, right? In Texas and state by state, we'll hash these things. We'll listen to women, listen to mothers, I've been, and try to get this right. But we understand this is a big deal, and it's and we know that there are ladies across America who said something else. So we're sensitive to that. We're listening. This is not a day for live people to gloat. This is a day for us all to be thankful and to come together and get this right at the state level. So this is not the end. This is really just
Very good. We're working on some technical difficulties, but I'm going to pass the phone to Jason for him to ask you another question.
okay. Thank you.
Just for our viewers, we're talking to State Senator Brian Hughes on the line here. He is a Republican from Mineola. Of course, he authored the heartbeat bill, which passed last legislative session. I have two questions, Senator. First, about SB 8, the heartbeat bill. It passed. It was before the U.S. Supreme Court. The heartbeat bill essentially said that abortion will allow beyond 6 weeks after a woman got pregnant. That case was before the Supreme Court. What now happens to that case with this ruling today?
You bet. So the Supreme Court allowed the Texas heartbeat to stand. With the ruling today, the heartbeat law takes a different position because, as you know, in the heartbeat law, there is private civil enforcement of the law. And so that will still exist. That will still be out there. So in Texas, with the trigger law that we passed last session, now that Roe v. Wade is overturned, we'll be coming back to the laws we had, so that if the life of the mother or risk to the mother's health is there, then the abortion can go forward. Other than that, there's no abortion allowed. That little baby's life will be saved. And so that will take effect immediately. But there will still be that private cause of action. It may be that there are district attorneys who do not want the law. In fact, you know, last year before we passed the heartbeat, several district attorneys around the country, even some in Texas, said we will not pro-life laws. So now that Roe versus Wade is gone, we're still have some district attorneys who refuse to enforce the law. And for that, civil remedy, the civil mechanism in the heartbeat law will still be in effect.
And on the line with us here again is State Senator Hughes, who is the author of the heartbeat bill. Just for clarity here, because Teresa and I have been talking about this for a couple of days, with the trigger law in place here in Texas, what does it mean with the abortion ruling? Is there a 30-day period before the trigger law goes into effect outlawing abortion in this state, or does that happen right now?
So there's language about a 30-day transition, but because pre-Roe versus Wade abortion laws are still on the book, and because we specifically reaffirmed them when we passed the heartbeat bill last session, in effect, now that Roe is gone, that's already the law. So the heartbeat bill, the trigger law has some language about a 30-day window, but based on existing law and laws we passed last session, it's really effective in Texas today.
And I have one more question. I'm going to pass it off to Teresa, and I've got to run for a second here too. But legislatively, next steps. What happens when you and your colleagues return to Austin in January? Do you expect a further tightening? We have heard from Chairman Briscoe Cain in the Texas House saying that he wants to introduce legislation that would punish companies that would pay for abortions, pay for their employees to get abortions aid. What do you expect we'll see next year?
I know there's going to be a lot of ideas floating around. Let me say this clearly. What we will not do, we will not be criminalizing the mothers. Mothers in these situations are victims. In fact, the mothers who go through the process tell us that most of them say if they'd had different circumstances, they would not have chosen abortion. We want to love and respect those mothers. So regardless states do, Texas will not be criminalizing or bringing any action against the mother. We won't be doing that. We will be looking at it, we'll be expanding that alternatives to abortion program. That's the $100 million we added last to help those moms with baby formula, diapers, car seats, help them with adoption, and through that. We're going to be expanding that program to give more help to those moms. So that would be looking for next session. That's what I'll be championing next session.
Stand by for my lead, Teresa, here.
Senator, thanks for bearing as we deal with these technical difficulties and we pass this phone back and forth. Okay, so you are saying that the trigger law language, and we've been saying this, 30 days from now, abortion becomes outlawed in the state of Texas, you are saying, no, it's effective now, this moment.
That's right, because it's a little bit technical. When Roe versus Wade came down in 1973, they blocked enforcement of the Texas abortion statutes. Those statutes are still there. They were never removed from the books. And when we passed the heartbeat law last session, we reaffirmed, both houses signed by the governor, reaffirmed those laws are there. So even without the trigger law, now that Roe versus Wade is gone, those laws are in place. So the 30-day transition period is in the trigger law, but even without that, now that Roe versus Wade is gone, those laws are back in place.
Are you alone in that belief? Is that the majority belief in the state of Texas amongst Republican colleagues and amongst all legal minds?
I don't know what all legal minds have to say about it. I know that many folks in the abortion industry are cautious about it. In fact, there was in the media about that, how abortionists in different states are approaching this. That's an open question. But now that Roe versus Wade is gone, things are different.
And my final question for you: asking you as a legal mind now, do you anticipate there will be more fights in the legal system in Texas over the course of the next 30 days for people who believe that, maybe we could stop this trigger law? Do you believe there's any standing for that?
I'm sure there will be lawsuits filed against law, against Texas' existing abortion laws. I'm sure we'll be back in court. You are correct. I think there's no doubt about that.
Senator, I appreciate you joining us very much. Thanks again for rolling with us through these technical difficulties. But you're a wonderful mind to have on and to talk with this morning. So thanks for so much time.
You're very kind to include me. Thank you a lot.
All right, thank you. All right, everybody. I am going to hang up Jason's phone, where we were speaking to Senator Hughes, the state senator who wrote the heartbeat bill in the state of Texas, Senate Bill 8. Okay, I think we're going to pause for just a second. We're going to take a break. We're going to try to reset and take care of a few tech problems that we're having. So stay with us, everybody. Don't go away. I will join again in just a few minutes as we sort through a few things. So thanks for tuning in and stay with us.
Oh shit. Works.
Hello again, everybody. Teresa Woodard, the WFAA Newsroom. Our continuing coverage of this landmark decision from the U.S. Supreme Court continues now. Thanks for hanging with us. We had a few technical difficulties we needed to work through earlier, but we believe we have crossed those hurdles and we are ready to go. We're going to try to bring you some clarity on what this means for Texans at this moment. In order to sift through this legal opinion, it is a very long opinion. We want to bring in a scholar who understands every word of it, and that is Eric Cedillo. He's an adjunct professor at the SMU Law School. Eric, it is really great to see you. Thanks for jumping in with us on short notice.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
All right, Eric. So take us through the basics. What are the highlights? What does this opinion say?
Yeah, it's actually an incredible watershed moment, as everybody kind of knows. We anticipated this with the Alito leak that came out a few weeks ago. It's one in which they've overturned Roe v. Wade and Casey and the progeny that kind of comes from behind. What it basically does is it finds there's no constitutional right, federal constitutional right to an abortion. And that had been grounded, I think, with the past cases from the Supreme Court in maintaining that there was a right under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. And what Alito has said is that basically we don't have a history in this nation of it being deeply rooted in history and tradition, and because of that, there is no right under the Constitution. So what can happen is you should look to your states to make those determinations based on the electorate there. So it's basically done away with the federal constitutional right to have an abortion. So the states will now be making those decisions. And of course, specifically here in the state of Texas, we have a trigger law that will go into effect most likely 30 days from today, basically saying you can no longer get an abortion here in the state of Texas.
How different is this from the leak that we saw? For everything I'm understanding, and I have not had a chance to read every single page of this, it's very similar to the leaked document that came out in May.
Yeah, there really aren't many changes. It basically has the same holding. It's pretty much everything that he mentioned was to be put out was going to be is the same thing that's come out in this order. So it's a situation where nothing has really changed. I know many pundits and people were kind of hopeful that the language may change, or they may come back with a different interpretation or reliance in terms of what they were relying on. That hasn't been the case, and unfortunately, there was actually a concurrence from Justice Thomas that we hadn't, of course, seen before that calls into question a number of other rights that may be attacked in other cases. Certainly, the right to contraception or privacy in the bedroom, same-sex marriage. So this is going to have unfortunately, an effect that lots of dominoes may be falling. And because of that, a lot more people, this may affect a lot more folks into the future, even beyond this incredibly watershed of overturning Roe v. Wade.
So that's, again, I have not personally read every word of this. It's a big question a lot of people had. And so your interpretation would be that the people this thinking, if they chip away at a woman's right, that same-sex marriage, contraception, things like that could be. And as you read this, you believe that is the case.
Yeah, absolutely, and it isn't really just speculative. It's one of the people who sided with overturning Roe v. Wade, basically a concurring opinion that other cases can be attacked. And we heard that from the actual Supreme Court. Of course, Justice Thomas has hinted around that or made suggestion of that possibility. But the way in which they've overruled it, they basically said that it is not history and tradition of our nation. And because of that, as you can imagine, it's not explicit in the Constitution. If there's no specific right, you have to look to that being steeped in history. And they said that the right to abortion was not that. So there's just so many others that the Supreme Court has maintained and suggest that we've had that history through privacy in the bedroom, contraception, same-sex marriage. So they're very attentive. He basically just came out with a concurring opinion that supports that. Unfortunately, I think that basically signals to some of these that they should proceed along those lines, and ultimately, when they make its way up court in its current composition, if it's composed in the same way, that those dominoes may fall as well.
Eric, I know this is slightly out of your wheelhouse, but I want to try to get your take on this. You mentioned earlier in this digital coverage, we talked about the Texas trigger law for a moment, and I read through something that Attorney General Ken Paxton put out, and he says that trigger law would take effect 30 days after the judgment. Is only the opinion. So he says 30 days after the judgment. However, when we talked to State Senator Brian Hughes earlier, he said in his that abortion is illegal in the state of Texas at this moment because when Roe v. Wade is overturned, old abortion statutes go into effect. Those were never taken off the books. So I think there's a little bit of ambiguity here, and maybe some clarity is needed. Again, I know this might not be your wheelhouse. Your opinion at this moment, what is law in Texas?
Yeah, I think that's a relatively reasonable interpretation. If we've had it on the books and then that it's no longer protected, then that might be a possibility. But I would imagine that most people can count on that 30-day trigger law going into effect as to what to happen. The unfortunate byproduct of our past law here in the state of Texas, which are a civil right to sue, has prevented a lot of folks here in the state of Texas actually receiving abortions because we really closed up. She had been going to other states to do this, so there isn't. We haven't had a whole lot of folks utilizing the opportunity to do that. But I think at present, it is a possibility, and I probably have to look at it a little bit deeper in terms of what our past laws, because we're talking prior to Roe v. Wade over 50 years ago in terms of what was in the books, whether or not those are still in effect with the opening of this ruling. But what we've done recently, it's possible that those have taken that into consideration, taken those up, and that we may have that 30-day window, which again, for many that may not know this, it makes it a crime, a felony for the allowance or the assistance of a woman receive abortion. So you can imagine that no clinics, no doctors are going to be doing these procedures during, probably starting now, just to avoid the possibility of being prosecuted under this new law. But specifically, what it states is 30 days from the issuance of the opinion.
Yeah, you just talked about the difference that the trigger law that will have criminal penalties versus the beat bill that was so deeply divisive and certainly picked apart. That is civilly enforced. I know doctors could face in prison a $100,000 fine if they violate the law and we provide a pregnant woman an abortion after the trigger law takes effect. Now, that law also does allow, there's no exceptions for rape or incest, but there is an exception to save the life of or if that pregnant person risks substantial impairment of major bodily function. I'm reading from something to make sure I get that quote correct. I also heard that there's some ambiguity there because exactly what I mean, it's a subjective decision on whether this saves the life of it. So are you concerned about that in informing this law in the state, that maybe it will not be clear on when exactly it is a proper time to provide a woman with an abortion?
Certainly, and I'm sure there's many out there with that very same sentiment and feeling. I think, initially we think of them solely as medical doctors who are perhaps in an abortion clinic and providing the service, but there are a number of other doctors, room physicians, gynecologists, others that may be concerned how we're going to, enforce this law. So that very possibility exists under this statute. When you have a situation where the woman is certainly in a situation where her life is in peril, most doctors would maintain their Hippocratic oath and do the abortion if it's going to save her life. But there may be closer questions. And again, those things need to be kind of vetted out, hopefully, and luckily, you probably do have district attorneys who would be the ones who would enforce these laws and take those things into consideration and provide the doctors with a modicum of support in terms of the medical community, which quite honestly we should be doing to make those determinations. So in practicality, I'm hoping that we give our doctors enough leeway to make those decisions based on medical probabilities. But again, the language of it, there's almost always ambiguity in the language and a fear that many doctors may say, it was a close call and I don't want to do it. And then something bad could happen, a woman to carry that child to term. So very scary stuff for physicians across our state, unfortunately.
Okay, we've talked a little bit about Texas specifically. I want to zoom back out to the Supreme Court. Without the makeup right now, do you believe that this would have happened? Do you believe we would have to this day if these specific justices were not on the?
No, I don't think so. I think a situation where we saw in relatively recent looks at the abortion law, certainly Casey that came after Roe v. Wade, we had a majority that was pretty staunch on maintaining what's called stare decisis, which is adhering to what past precedent was all about, relying on what the Supreme Court has done in the past. And these three new justices, we always had Thomas and Alito, who were of the opinion that perhaps Roe v. be overturned. They've said as much. But then you've got the votes in the new justices coming to fore, Rich and Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. So it's one in which the composition board has flipped, and it's a 6-3 opinion. The closer call would have been Justice Roberts, but he sided with the majority in this instance. But those appointees of Donald Trump have changed the composition of. And if it maintains a 9-member, I don't think that much is going to change in terms of what it is we're seeing, in terms of their logic in coming to these conclusions. And I'm fearful of some of the other cases that may fall based on.
You talked about that. Well, remind me again, because I don't want to use the language improperly. Was it the majority opinion that a way that makes you feel as though other rights, or was it that opinion from Thomas? Which one gives you the most pause?
My goodness, it's both. The majority opinion, Alito coming out and saying what he said, that you must look, that if it's not explicit, like the Second Amendment rights, we have it's explicit and it's just based on the interpretation. But the founding of Roe v. Wade was based on an implied, liberty right under the Due Process Clause of the Amendment. So if that's the case, if it's implied, then you look to the history, is what he maintained. And he basically said that based on our history, there is no right to an abortion. So if you take that into account, all of these other rights, again, same-sex marriage, contraception, privacy in the bed, all of those may fall by the wayside because, one, they're not explicit in the Constitution, and they would have to be found steeped in our nation's history and tradition. And it's very easy to see, very easy to fathom if these justices in the majority could very easily find that they're not for history and tradition and overrule them. So I think it's very real. Certainly, Thomas coming out with a concurrence specific to that kind of tells you where they may lead. Now, when it comes down to it, it's possible that these three justices, new to the court, may not go as far as that with respect to these other rights, but very real possibility exists that it could happen.
This has been a really great conversation and eye-opening. Thank you for helping our viewers on WFAA.com understand what this means. Before I let you go, I'm just curious. Before the leak, maybe we didn't think that this could happen. Are you surprised?
Unfortunately, people who follow it, I'm not surprised. When the new composition court came into play, we knew what Alito was saying. We knew what Thomas was always saying about the precariousness of When they added those three over the last few years, it was something that we could kind of anticipate. And certainly when the leak came information of what many of us knew that was going to happen. Just like then, the unfortunate future, the immediate is we could anticipate other cases from the same logic that the majority of the Supreme Court has utilized. It is what it is, and if the composition of this court doesn't, by the addition of additional justices or perhaps changing some way, but as we all know, that may not happen. These are very young justices. We'd be looking at these laws in trouble for a very long time.
All right, Eric Cedillo, SMU, an adjunct law professor there. We really appreciate. Thanks for helping me and our viewers better understand exactly what happened. This was a watershed moment, and you are exactly right. So thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
All right, good to see you. I want to see, Pete, do we have any of those live images available that we could show from any places in the, okay, all right, so we can't show you the live images from the U.S. Supreme Court right now, but they're within the last, well, this opinion came out at about 9:10 Central Time, so for about the past hour and a half or so, there's been groups of people, as you would expect to have happen, gathering in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, and many of them had been in Washington, D.C. for the last few days, anticipating that this opinion would be coming out at some point. All right, so we've talked to Eric Cedillo, getting his viewpoint on exactly what this means from a legal standpoint. I do want to try to pick this apart a little bit, this sort of ambiguity that might exist in the state of Texas right now. If you were with us earlier, you might have heard from State Senator Hughes. He was the author of the heartbeat law in the state of Texas, and he said in his opinion, with Roe v. Wade being overturned, Texas does go back to the statutes that were on the book prior to Roe v. Wade 50 years ago, and that would mean that abortion is illegal in the state of Texas. However, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has put forth a press release that says the trigger law will take effect 30 days after the U.S. Supreme Court judgment is issued. A judgment is slightly different than an opinion. The opinion came out today. So Paxton has said abortion will be clearly illegal in the state of Texas after a judgment comes out, and he does expect for that to happen soon. So a little bit of ambiguity right now on exactly where things stand in the state of Texas. However, you did hear from SMU law professor Eric Cedillo just a couple of minutes ago explaining that because of that ambiguity, it might mean that any providers would be hesitant at this moment and going forward to provide this service to anyone, not necessarily being able to understand exactly what the law is right now and as we move forward. You were looking at some video of the U.S. Supreme Court there. That's not live. That's not happening at this moment. We know there are protests outside of the U.S. Supreme Court unfolding at this very moment. I do want to bring up a few statements that we've received, and goodness, we have received a lot. So forgive me that I'm going to have to scroll through my email here and go very far back. But I do want to tell you what Texas Governor Greg Abbott has said. Let me see if I can find his statement real quickly, and then I will read a couple of other statements from some of our other lawmakers in the state of Texas. Forgive me, the inbox is full, and so there's a lot to scroll through here. Let's see if we can find the governor's statement, because I think that's important for you to know what the governor of the state of Texas has said. Here we go. From Greg Abbott, quote, "The U.S. Supreme Court correctly overturned Roe v. Wade and reinstated the right of states to protect innocent unborn children. Texas is a pro-life state. We have taken significant action to protect the sanctity of life." Now, one thing that people on the other side of this issue have said is questioning what kind of assistance will there be for women in the state of Texas if we are forcing them to carry a pregnancy to term and to have a child. What sort of assistance is there for them after that child is born. And here's where the governor's statement goes on from there. He says, quote, "I signed laws that extended Medicaid health coverage to 6 months postpartum, appropriated $345 million for women's health programs, and invested more than $100 million toward alternative to abortion programs. This provides counseling, mentoring, care coordination, material assistance, such as car seats, diapers, and housing." That's from Texas Governor Greg Abbott, and that is one of the arguments that we have heard from activists on the pro-choice side of this argument. They have said, if you are forcing a woman to carry a pregnancy to term, forcing a mother to have a child, what kind of assistance is the state of Texas going to give to make sure that that child can live and flourish and that the mother is okay as well? I do want to tell you a couple of interesting things that we heard from State Senator Brian Hughes earlier this morning. We had him on. Hughes, again, was the author of SB 8, the heartbeat bill that went into effect in the state of Texas in September. An interesting quote from him, I thought, that he said, "This is not a day for pro-life people to gloat." He said there's nothing more private or more difficult than a woman making this decision. And so he said, we will be working in the next legislative session to put more money, put more funding towards helping women and families who may now have a child that, given a choice, maybe they wouldn't have chosen to have. Let's see, I also wanted to bring up a couple of other statements. I read to you, Governor Greg Abbott. Clearly it's important to tell you what his opponent, Beto O'Rourke, has said. Here's a quote from Beto O'Rourke. He says, quote, "The only way to overcome today's decision is to win this race for governor. The Supreme Court has sent this back to the states, and our state's current governor has outlawed abortion beginning at conception with no exception for rape or incest." All right, I see my colleague Jason Whiteley right here over my shoulder.
We can't do this on TV, only on digital.
Only on digital. Can we actually just have somebody pop the head
But
over?
we have been trying to get clarity on, I'll use your microphone here, that's why I'm getting a little closer here too. We did get clarity. If you can go back to the
Ken Paxton
Attorney General.
Sure.
I was told, yeah, we didn't read far enough down in here. Second to last paragraph is what they pointed us to. That's the one that I think is what you and I discussed earlier. If you want to share that out.
Okay. All right, so let me see if I can parse this a little bit. If you'll give me a moment to read it myself. Okay, so.
It's illegal starting today.
Got it. So, as we talked to Eric Cedillo about this, and the ambiguity is something that was concerning to him, and he said that he did believe that providers would probably choose not to perform abortions in the state of Texas because of that ambiguity. So if you read the statement that Ken Paxton put out, which I talked about earlier, Ken Paxton, Texas Attorney General, which says that 30 days after a judgment, the trigger law takes effect, banning all abortions. If you read the entire thing, it does mention, because the statutes that were in place 50 years ago when Roe v. Wade was passed or became law in the United States, because the Texas statutes remain on the books. Now that Roe has been overturned, we revert back to those old statutes, which mean that a provider could be criminally liable for providing abortion starting today. So that is the interpretation, that abortions are illegal in the state of Texas starting today. The trigger law will go into effect later, but because right now the law that Roe v. Wade has been overruled, we revert back to the abortion statutes that were on the books 50 years ago, and abortion is illegal in the state of Texas starting today, according to Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. There's a lot to digest here, and if you are interested in seeing what some of your lawmakers, activists on both sides of this issue are saying, You can get a really good feel for it on WFAA.com. We have a lot of statements there and a lot of reaction from everyone on both sides of this issue. Also, sort of an explainer reminding us all that Roe v. Wade has its roots in Dallas. Remember that it was a woman in Dallas, Jane Roe, who filed the initial challenge to the Texas abortion law in the 1970s. And that's the case that made its way all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Roe was a Dallas woman. Wade is Henry Wade, the former Dallas district attorney. And so this case that is being overruled today with national implications started back here in Dallas in 1973, in January of 1973. So we're almost 50 years ago. But back then, it was a 7-2 decision that upheld Roe v. Wade in 1973, and here we are almost 50 years later with the decision from a very different makeup of the U.S. Supreme Court overruling that decision. So again, I feel like I might have left people a little confused on where things stand, but let me try to give one final bit of clarity to this. Yes, Texas has a trigger law. Yes, 13 other states have trigger laws, which means 30 days after the Roe v. Wade judgment is issued, abortion becomes illegal. However, because Texas never got rid of those old abortion laws that were on the books 50 years ago, making abortion legal, we've reverted to those. And so according to Attorney General Ken Paxton, the trigger law will go into effect in 30 days after the judgment is issued, but abortion is illegal in the state of Texas as of now. And that is the interpretation we heard from State Senator Hughes as well. So much to digest. We appreciate that you have been with us this morning as we've tried to pick apart and understand better exactly what this ruling says. We know what it means, and what it means is that there is no federal protection for an abortion for women in the United States. There are several laws where it will become illegal or expected to become illegal, and there are several states where the rights are expected to be protected as well. We will have continuing coverage all day long on WFAA, and we will, of course, have more for you here on WFAA.com as well. If you are watching right now on your phone or on a laptop or on a tablet or anything, we will stream our newscast. If you'd like to watch for the next hour, we'll have a lot of coverage about this on our newscast right at the top of the hour. We appreciate you being with us, and thank you for kind of rolling with us through a few hurdles that we had to overcome in order to try to make this a broadcast that we could sort of pick this apart and help you understand exactly what happened and what it means for women, what it means for Texans, and what it means for all Americans. So again, I'm Teresa Woodard, and we appreciate you watching. Stay tuned for our 11 a.m. newscast, and then of course we'll have more news for you throughout the day here on WFAA.com and on WFAA. Thanks for watching.